What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to talk about why I decided to use a Micro Four Thirds camera, and more specifically, why I decided to use a Lumix Micro Four Thirds camera. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Mercedes. I am a photographer here in Toronto. I have been a photographer for about 5 years now, and I mainly shoot beauty, portraits, and fashion. So let's dive in as to why I use a Micro Four Thirds camera. So I'm going to start with a bit of background here because I think this is important to know. So when I was starting photography, I started with just a simple point and shoot built-in lens camera from Lumix. And my dad came home one day and he says, "Here's a new camera, figure it out. We need someone to take pictures at parties, yada, yada, yada." And I'm like, okay, cool. So I ran with it, and now I'm here. But essentially what had happened was I was getting more clients and I was doing a lot better with my photography and I wanted to upgrade. So I kind of stumbled into a Micro Four Thirds system because at the time I was still so amateur that I didn't really know the difference between a full frame and a Micro Four Thirds. But now that I've been doing photography for so long and I've been using the system for so long, it is by far one of my favorite systems. And I'm going to give you guys a few reasons as to why it is. And hopefully you guys can, hopefully you guys like it. Let's dive in. So let's start off with why I use Lumix in the first place. So when I was in high school, I, would do pictures for the yearbook. I would do the sports teams, the clubs. I would do all those pictures. And my school had cameras that we can use, and they were Canons. They were really good, don't get me wrong. But when my dad came home, the one that he brought home was a Lumix. So I started using that and I started liking it a lot more than the Canon. It was just a lot easier to use. It was a little bit more user-friendly. So I just stuck with the Lumix and I told my teacher, hey, gonna use my own camera. I really don't mind. I just can use it a lot better than I can a Canon. Now, obviously Canon has come a long way and so has Lumix. But right from the beginning, the Lumix interface, the way they had their camera, the way it felt in my hands, I just liked it a lot better than the Canon. For some reason, I just couldn't grasp what Canon wanted me to do on their camera. But for Lumix, it was laid out super easily, and it was just easy for me to understand. Another reason why I decided to continue to use my Lumix is because of the colors. And I honestly cannot say this enough. The colors on the Lumix, even just from the raw image, is insane. And I've attached 2 photos here for you guys to see. One is a raw image right off the camera, and then the other one is a picture that I've edited. I have never found a camera that I have been able to not even touch. I barely even have to touch my pictures. I have not been able to find a camera that gives me photos with this color range. To me, that is my biggest selling point with Lumix, and is something I rave about to everyone that I talk to about cameras, because people always ask me why. Why do you use Lumix and not Sony or Fuji or Canon? And I say simply because the interface and the colors. It's insane what Lumix can do. So now that we've got the Lumix background out of the way, let's dive into why I kind of use the Micro Four Thirds system over full frame. And this is quite funny because when I talk to other professionals and I talk to other photographers in the industry, they'll ask me what camera I use. And I'll say, oh yeah, like the Lumix G85. And they kind of look at me like, oh, what's that? And I was like, oh yeah, here it is. And I'm like, it's a Micro Four Thirds system. And each time I tell them that, they just their jaw drops and they just look at me like, Micro Four Thirds, why are you using Micro Four Thirds? Usually professionals use a full frame. And I'm just sitting here, or a mirrorless, and I'm sitting here well, I'm gonna let my work speak for itself. But yeah, there's a few key reasons why, and we're gonna get into them. I know I've been babbling. So this is the Lumix G85 with the 35 to 100 millimeter lens. Now with a Micro Four Thirds camera, you have to remember that the lens measurements are half of what it would be on a full frame. So 35 to 100 would be your 70 to 200 millimeter lens. A 42.5 portrait lens is an 85 millimeter on a full frame. So it's just half of what your actual, like, the full frame lens is. And because they are half of that, the lenses are pretty much almost like half the size. Like, these lenses are so small and so lightweight. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I like the Micro Four Thirds system, simply because the lenses are 10 times smaller, doesn't take up a lot of room in my photography bag. And it's just easier to carry around. Like, my hand's not exhausted by the time I'm done a photo shoot. So that was a big selling point for me, simply just because of size, weight, um, and the fact that I can still get the full benefits of using a full frame in a Micro Four Thirds system. So that was a really big selling point for me. So the next selling point for me as to why I use a Micro Four Thirds system is the in-camera stabilization. And now Lumix has done a really good job with their in-camera in-lens stabilization. They've really come a long way with that, in my opinion. But I find this camera has a lot better stabilization than some of the full frames and mirrorless cameras that I've used. I'm able to, like, freehand a lot of stuff, and I don't necessarily need a tripod for every single thing I do. I can get away with being freehand and having it stabilized. Maybe that's just because I have a steady hand, but even if I'm shaky, the stabilization system in a Micro Four Thirds camera is, I think, truly unmatched. I haven't really been able to find a full frame or mirrorless with as good a stabilization as this. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but that's just another selling point that I'm gonna say to you guys. One thing about a Micro Four Thirds system is it has a panoramic mode. Now, I'm not sure if some mirrorless or some full frames have the panoramic mode, but this one does, and Lumix does. And I think it's so cool because if I go to a cool landscape, I don't have to take out my iPhone and do a panoramic. I can actually do it in here because the system allows it. And when I was really big into, like, nature photography, like a couple years ago, that was a huge feature for me. I would, like, rave about it to my friends. I'm like, oh my God, I can shoot panoramics and I don't have to use my phone anymore. And yeah, it was just a really big selling point for me at the time. And I think a lot of nature photographers and a lot of landscape photographers would really love that feature. So yeah. Another big selling point for me is just how small it is. Like, my 42.5 millimeter lens is, like, probably this big. It's half the size of this. So when I'm shooting in, let's say I'm at a concert and I'm shooting, or I'm at a club and I'm doing club photography, and I am trying to be incognito and I really don't want anyone to kind of see me, or I don't want them to see this big freaking lens, that's what I really like it for. It kind of, because the lenses are so much smaller, because it's so much, even just the camera body's a lot smaller, I can stay incognito a lot better. And because I shoot in low light situations, because I'm shooting in concerts and clubs and stuff, I personally just don't want a big lens with me, because I am holding my camera for about 3-4 hours. So I don't want the weight of that. And then obviously I don't want the weight on my neck. But also, I just don't want people to see me. I'm not to be seen when I'm in those settings. So the smaller my camera, the better. My last kind of, like, big reason as to why I use a Micro Four Thirds, and I think this is one that I think will resonate with a lot of you. Aside from it being, a smaller system, smaller lens, yada, 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 aside all the reasons I did, at the end of the day, you can still achieve professional and expert results with a Micro Four Thirds system. You don't need to be shooting mirrorless or full frame to get the results that you want. You can do everything they can do in a Micro Four Thirds system. It is also a lot more budget friendly. So if you are starting out, or you are trying to reach that, like, semi-pro or amateur level, and you don't have a lot of money to spend on, a higher up model, go with a micro four thirds for a little bit. It is cheaper, it's budget friendly, and you're still gonna get the same results as you would with a full frame camera. I mean, I'm gonna let my work speak for itself, but the work that I'm putting out, I've never had an issue with someone coming to me and say that I can't use a micro four thirds system. Nobody's ever cared. If anything, they're more shocked that I'm getting the photos I'm getting on a micro four thirds system. Um, so that's probably my big final reason as to why I use a micro four thirds system. Um, and especially a Lumix one too. I find, people are always shocked when I say, oh yeah, I use Lumix. And then they're like, oh, okay, like that's pretty cool. And then I say it's micro four thirds. And it's so out of the norm for photographers to be Lumix and micro four thirds creator and be at the level that I'm at. It's a great conversation starter, I will say. But it does get people's attention, and I think that's kind of one of the reasons why I probably won't switch to a mirrorless or a full frame. I think I'm gonna stay micro four thirds for a long time because, I mean, like I said, my work speaks for itself. I'm still getting the expert results and the professional results that is getting me published and getting me recognized. And at the end of the day, doesn't matter what camera you have, it matters what you do with the camera. So if you go to micro four thirds, you have to really learn the system and really learn the camera, and then obviously put your creative twist behind you and you'll be unstoppable. Same thing if you buy a full frame, people took the time to learn the camera and learn how to use it, and their photos speak for themselves. So yeah, that's kind of my last big selling point from micro four thirds. Anyways, that is all I have for you guys today. I kind of just wanted to make this short video and really explain why I use the micro four thirds system and why I love it so much and why I love using Lumix as my camera as well. But yeah, if you have any topics or questions or anything you want me to cover, put it in the comments below. I'm going to link all of my social media. You guys can give me a follow, reach out. I love connecting with people. But other than that, make sure you subscribe to my channel so that way you never miss a video, and have a fantastic day.